Welcome back to the Barrel Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode. Let's talk about it. It's been a minute, but we're back talking some basketball. Football season's kind of filled up the schedule, getting some content out about football every week, but basketball season is right around the corner. Time to get back into that mode about talking NBA. Now, we started the last deep dive off talking about the New York Knicks. We're going to continue our series of talking about every single team before this upcoming NBA season. This episode, we're going to be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, talking about what they did last season, their expectations, some of the offseason moves, and what I expect from them as a team, and also giving you an X factor I think that is very vital for them to have a successful season. But before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, helps the channel out a ton. But let's start talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that, in my opinion, is somewhat of a sleeping giant. I feel like a lot of people going into this upcoming season are overlooking the Milwaukee Bucks and the talent that they do have on their roster. Looking at last season, it was an underwhelming year. Chris Middleton was hurt most of the year, and then you have Giannis injuries in the playoffs, Dame getting hurt in the playoffs, and I feel like the injuries kind of really ruined all of last year, especially when you have the head coaching change in the middle of the season. As soon as that happened, I kind of knew what kind of season we were getting from the Milwaukee Bucks, and I was more so looking towards next year. And when teams make a big-time move going into the year where kind of the core foundation of this team and how they play is kind of switched up, going from Jrue Holiday to Damian Lillard, I always want to give this team kind of a year grace to kind of figure out everything. You're adding Damian Lillard, who was in Portland his entire career, and then he makes that transition to Milwaukee now to where he's more of a number two when he's been the number one his entire career. So I wanted to give the Milwaukee Bucks a little bit of a grace period going from their first year into their second year. Now they have Doc Rivers as a head coach. Kind of still up in the air about that. I don't really know how I feel about that as a whole because of just his track record in general. But I think this team is going to be very, very dangerous if they can remain healthy. Like, this is a team that has still a surplus of talent. You still have a Giannis Antetokounmpo, who I feel like people are forgetting because he hasn't played in the playoffs in the past 2 seasons due to injury. And I think that is just a leaving thought in the back of people's minds when we forget how good Giannis really is. Giannis is still an MVP candidate every given season. You still have a Damian Lillard, still one of the clutchest players in basketball. You still have Chris Middleton, who can do a little bit of everything. This team still has a lot of star power to make a big-time run, and I still think this team is getting overlooked when you're talking about the hierarchy in the Eastern Conference for sure, because I think they can match up with a lot of different teams the best. I think they match up best with the Celtics because they do have a Giannis. I think they match up really good with the Knicks, and I think they really match up good with the kind of bottom half teams, and I'm interested to see how they do match up with Philly, just with all the Philly has done this offseason. But going into their offseason moves, not too much to work with because they weren't a team that's going to make a big-time move. Bobby Portis was getting floated in trade rumors, Pat Connaughton, even some Brook Lopez a little bit here and there. But looking at their offseason moves with what they did do, the only thing I didn't really like was one move that they did. Taurean Prince, I think that's a great 3-and-D wing guy that can just fill into your rotation because they are kind of a little bit lackluster in terms of depth at that wing spot. So I think getting somebody like him just be a rotational piece can really help, especially with how his fit is off the ball. With Dame and Giannis, I feel like if you do have Chris Middleton miss some time, I think Taurean Prince can be a nice little plug-and-play piece. Not saying he's going to be what Chris Middleton is, but a nice plug-and-play piece that can kind of do a little bit of everything for this team. You bring in Gary Trent Jr. using your mid-level. I love that deal. I feel like his defense is kind of taking a step back, but you're getting him into a new situation and a more winning culture in Milwaukee this year, and I feel like him next to Damian Lillard can be a pretty nice backcourt. He can space, he can defend, he can be in the passing lanes, and I feel like that is somebody that they desperately need to be more consistent from three, especially on that perimeter. And Malik Beasley was really, really good for them last year, but I think Gary Trent Jr. can just give them a little bit more shot creation, a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball as well. And in the draft, this is one of the kind of main gripes I did have with this team. First round pick in the 20s, you take A.J. Johnson, who's really more of a project piece, super raw prospect coming out of the draft. At that point in time, I think they could have went a lot more different directions. I think Terrence Shannon Jr. would have been a perfect piece, especially somebody that can just really play a number of different positions, defend, shoot, do a little bit of everything. I thought that was going to be a perfect fit. I know I mocked that in a couple of my drafts. I thought they could have went maybe a big here because this is around the time where the Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez kind of trade talks kind of started to get ramped up a little bit more throughout the draft process. But they ended up taking A.J. Johnson, who's more of a project piece. I would have loved to see them kind of maybe try to trade out of this spot. maybe trade back, maybe pick up a player that could help them right now. But A.J. Johnson, I just don't really, it's a head scratcher for a team that's looking to compete right now. Hopefully, maybe I'm proved wrong. Maybe he's kind of in this rotation from day one. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. And then in the second round, they get Tyler Smith, somebody who was really consistently mocked in the first round of most drafts out of the G League. I think that is a really, really good pickup because he is somebody that can kind of fill in and fit in that front court depth for sure right away because of his versatility, his ability to space and shoot the ball and kind of guard multiple positions. He is a little bit more on the raw side of things coming into the league for sure, but I do still think that he can kind of find his way into this rotation on this Bucks team that is kind of lacking that depth, if you know what I mean. Going into their starting five, I think it's going to be Dame, Gary Trent Jr., Chris Middleton, Giannis, and Brook Lopez. Looking at this compared to last year, I think Malik Beasley not in this compared to Gary Trent Jr. I think your defense just takes a little bit of a step up because Malik Beasley isn't the best defender. Putting him and Dame in the backcourt is a big reason why they didn't really have the best kind of defense compared to the years past, even with the Drew Holiday. I just think that backcourt defense is kind of what really made them easier to attack compared to past years. Then going into the X Factor, I think the X Factor is clearly Chris Middleton and what he can provide for this team. He was hurt majority of last year, going in and out of the lineup multiple times throughout the year with an injury. I just think we saw still glimpses of what Chris Middleton can be at his healthiest in the playoffs. He was having big playoff performances against the Indiana Pacers when Giannis was out, and then when Damian Lillard was out. That's the version of Chris Middleton I still think is in there. I think this team is, yes, an older team, but if you get Chris Middleton to be healthy, he can provide you that secondary shot creator and playmaker outside of Damian Lillard on the perimeter to work with Giannis in the pick and roll. He's another solid defender. He's a spot-up shooter when you need him to be. He is the Swiss Army knife for this team to make a deep playoff run because he can do everything at a super solid / elite level, in my opinion, because he is such a good shot creator when you need him to be. He's a good spot-up shooter. He's a good defender. He's a good rebounder. He does everything for this team. And missing him throughout the majority of last year hurt kind of the chemistry when it did kind of come playoffs when you ended up losing Giannis to feel like he was kind of not in a rhythm. And then once he got into that rhythm in the playoffs against the Pacers, I feel like you saw, wow, Chris Middleton is still really good at basketball. So I feel like this team is a sleeping giant, and going into my expectations is because just because they was hurt last year doesn't really change my perspective on how dangerous this team can be this year, because if it comes down to it and they are fully healthy, I think they are the best team that matches up with the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference because they have great interior presence with a Giannis and a Brook Lopez and a Bobby Portis, and that's where you can attack the Boston Celtics. Looking at it, that's the X factor I have is Chris Middleton. He's healthy. I think this really brings this team together. I love some of the pieces in Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr. I love Tyler Smith out of the draft. A.J. Johnson is still a piece I got to kind of see work out in the NBA because I think he is such a raw prospect. But in terms of expectations, sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference, I wouldn't be surprised if this team is a top 2 to 3 team in the Eastern Conference record-wise. But I feel like a lot of people are going to be turning their heads middle of the season when they're like, oh, the Milwaukee Bucks are the 1 seed, fighting for the 1 seed with the Boston Celtics. I think this team is that talented. The only thing it comes down to, and it comes down to a majority of things with a lot of these teams that I am talking about before the season, is health. If this team is healthy, they have the top-end talent and star power to make a deep playoff run. And I think that's the only thing that's kind of held this team back. When they lost in the first round to the Miami Heat, Giannis missed 2 of those games, but they kind of faced a Miami Heat team that just got hot at the right time out of the play-in. And then that following year, you make a big move, you make a big splash, and then you get hurt come playoff time. You lose Damian Lillard, you lose Giannis into the playoffs. So I think that is a big reason why this team has been getting held back. And I feel like a lot of people are forgetting they have Dame and Giannis on the same team due to injury. I think teams are people are really kind of sleeping on the Milwaukee Bucks and what they can be this upcoming season. All it comes down to is if this team can stay healthy. I know they're an older team, and that kind of can be a struggle for older teams. But if they do, I'm not shocked at all if this team makes another deep playoff run and makes a push to go to the finals out of the East. But that is all I have for this episode of breaking down every NBA team before this upcoming season. This was focused on the Milwaukee Bucks. Thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope to see you tune in to future episodes.